And FDA officials say there's no evidence that the salmonella outbreak at the 2 Iowa egg farms has spread to other locations, but still investigators are trying to figure out what caused the contamination that led to a recall of more than 500 million eggs. At least 40 new cases have been reported in just the last few days, bringing the total to nearly 2,000 cases spread out over 15 states. Now, this massive egg recall has raised some new questions about the consolidation of the egg industry into just fewer farms. Could it also result in new government scrutiny of those farms? For those answers, for those questions, we're joined on the line by Patty Lovera. She's an assistant director of the Food and Water Watch. It's a nonprofit group that lobbies the government on agricultural issues. Patty, thanks for joining us on the line. Appreciate it. I'm just curious, as we're watching this recall unfold, your initial perspective on the scope of it and how many eggs have, in fact, been highlighted to have this potential contamination.
Well, there's two factors involved in why this recall is so big. One is the time frame, because it took so long to work backwards from sick people to find the source. And then when the FDA got to those plants, they probably are looking at records and looking at other practices, and they put a date on the recall. They're usually kind of guessing, but they set the date as the problem starting in May. So we're looking at a couple months worth of eggs, but we're also looking at two very, very large players. So both these companies are in the top 10, but the top 10 companies are producing half the eggs in this country. So, I mean, we're talking very large operations. So when something goes wrong at these operations, it's an awful lot of food.
Okay, the 2 points you brought up there. You mentioned the time frame. It's August. You're pinpointing it back to May. What do you think about that lag time? Too much time took place, or is that the right amount when you're finding a problem like this?
Well, I mean, you know, we're spending a lot of time on food safety, and we've done this for years, and this is always the dilemma of dealing with these things through a recall. I mean, you're working backwards from a problem already happening, and you're responding. So this is, you know, there's just a lot of steps. People get sick, they go to the doctor takes a test to say, oh, you have salmonella, it gets reported, it has to work its way through a local health department to the state, to the Centers for Disease Control, and when they noticed the problem in May, they started doing interviews and trying to trace back. It just takes a long time. So that's why we'd prefer to focus on preventing these problems, not, you know, we need to have a good response when there's a problem, but we also need to prevent them because it does take a long time to trace back to the source.
Of course, and let's look at the other point you were just mentioning, that we have fewer and fewer players in this market. Tell me about the consolidation trends we've been seeing.
Well, it's not just eggs. I mean, it's really our whole food system at this point. Literally, you know, a lot of people talk about from farm to fork, or, you know, there's lots of cutesy ways to describe it. But, you know, the feed that these chickens, you know, are fed, the baby chicks that grow up and then lay the eggs, it appears there's actually a common supplier for those things for both these farms that are involved in the recall. So we've seen consolidation at the beginning of the chain all the way through to the grocery stores where we buy it. There's less and less players. And so it's actually reached a point where the federal government is actually having some hearings this year to look into whether there's enough competition in our agriculture system. In fact, there's a big hearing in Colorado on Friday where the Attorney General and the Secretary of Agriculture will both be there talking about this issue.
Simple economies of scale as to why we got to this point with such consolidation?
We think it's bad policy and some bad economics. I mean, the mantra in agriculture since the late 60s or early 70s has literally, farmers have been told to get big or get out. And normal economics don't work so well with a plant like corn you can't tell to stop growing, or a cow that's not going to stop producing milk. And when you have buyers in the middle that process the food, and there's so few of them that they can kind of throw their weight around, it puts farmers at a real disadvantage. And then we still have this kind of illusion of a lot of choice for consumers. We have a lot of brand names and a lot of labels, but this recall kind of lifts the curtain on that. 2 companies were putting out eggs under 30 different labels.
One other thing I just want to talk about before we wrap up. You talked about how prevention is key for someone who's just going to the grocery store after wrapping up work today. What advice do you have for them when it comes to buying eggs right now? Can they trust the supply?
Well, we need to get a sense of what went wrong in these plants, and we're all kind of anxiously awaiting for a report from FDA about what happened. What do we know? There is a new rule on egg safety that literally went into effect last month. So we need to see how FDA enforces that, how they use it, if it is helping. And the best thing consumers can do in the very short term is check that recall list, make sure you're not buying something that's on it, but also cook your eggs thoroughly. It will help you protect you against salmonella. Raw eggs and undercooked eggs are the way that salmonella makes people people sick. And we love it when people can find a local operation. They can ask more questions about how the chickens were raised, what they do to prevent disease. You get a lot more information the closer you can get to the source.
So as you were saying, while the pressure's been on to get big, you're saying also support the little guys, the smaller farmers in your communities. Got it. Patty Lovera, thanks so much for sharing your expertise, telling us a little bit more about the consolidation in the industry as well. She's the Assistant Director of Food and Water Watch, joining us on the line there from Washington. Thank you.